42%. I was just discussing cult psychology, my participation in a cult. Well, I didn't know it was a cult while I was participating in it, honestly. And then you start to build knowledge of the cult. An important thing about cult psychology is that people will do bad things to keep you closer. When the bad things happen, that's part of the training. It's supposed to either draw you closer to the training or it'll move you far apart, not based on how wrong it is and how morally unaccountable the leader is, but whether or not it's meant for you and whether or not this is the right, place for you. Maybe it's not a good fit. You should leave because, you don't want to accept that being hurt by someone is part of your training. It's all part of training. Oh, sure, you can say you don't like it, but it's just part of how it all goes. And you'll see different people in the New Age world, men and women, go, oh, when there's a conflict and we do these seminars, it means that both people have something to work on from past life. It's never like that. It's aggressive. And the environment has unfortunately come to support that type of aggression. And where it exists, it has become effectively and even retroactively, on reflection, inevitable. No one ever goes to that place, right? Oh, it just happens. Humans are going to be in conflict, so let's say it's transformational therapy, right? And being raped is transformational therapy, and so on. It all becomes translated into some spiritual matrix. I've talked to rapists in the same cult who say, ultimately, it was part of what my victim had to learn, and I was part of some higher spiritual purpose in the karmic field of being, And this is where their minds go. Do you think then that when you see people's magical thinking, you feel comfortable when people are magically thinking and where they go, and that they can so easily justify the abuse of other people or minimize the abuse of other people or reverse accountability onto the victim after the abuse by other people? That's just a part of life and just what you should expect, right? That's your lot in life. You obviously haven't been abused enough yet to learn that, so you're going to keep getting abused until you do, right? Fascinating, isn't it? Let's go home. So I have to work this all through my system, right? What else do I have to talk about? What else would I, at the end of the day, visit my mom's. I want my mom to be healthy. I realized that in being weakened by shock the last few days, I couldn't guard my mother's health as well. She had a little stomach ache from a Caesar salad she got. And she doesn't usually get Caesar salads, which means my home has been weakened in some way by various forces. Come out here, make myself strong again, face my fears. We'll stop up ahead. And so, lowered inhibitions, suggestion, the tacit justification of abnormal behavior to the development, learning, or ranking, whether they're, and what happens is people in a cult end up just, once somebody goes out of line and starts complaining about something you're not allowed to complain about and doesn't want to digest something you shouldn't normally have to digest, you're going to interrupt the digestion in that living for all kinds of possibility. They're just living off of people. They're living off funds, not just because their clients pay for aromatherapy, but because eventually their clients pay with their flesh and blood. They're living off of people. They're living with lowered inhibitions that can demonstrate, especially when they're violent, reduced provisions or non-existent or lapsing provisions for the voice and safety of others. And they end up around people, maybe at best, that you have to endure and stretched so much to accommodate perverse territorial human behavior, male and female, you no longer preserve the safety of other people in your life. If I hang out with certain people, I might not be able to preserve the safety of you if you're another friend of mine, you know. And I've been around people where you almost have to lower your inhibitions just to be around them. And people around whom basically the kind of fun that you might have always involves lowering your inhibitions, right? And when people, you know, that's patterns of behavior. That invites danger, you know. It has, you can't just keep being around those people. There are good or bad reasons why they're that way. There are reasons, essentially. Doesn't mean you should want to be around them. If articulating the reasons, we wouldn't have violence to begin with, because we would know the reasons for things. The reason for violence would bring us into cult psychology and how there can be fractures and lapses, common as they are, that companies become used to meeting out to other people. So by the time you have to really deal with it, no matter how high you think your ethics are, you instinctively want to minimize it because you want to keep your sense of the good record. You want to keep your group's record clean. You're anxious to go, oh, there was a rape in my group. There's a rape in my family. There was a rape in my job. There was a rape among police officers. There's a rape. This is a dishonor to everyone unless we deal with it now. Put all of our other, to one side, not our inhibitions, but now we're going to have to release our inhibition to looking at things that throw maybe our entire way of life or everything we're working into some doubt. Better to throw that into doubt, which, as great as it is a bunch of ideas we've put our survival emotions into so that other people's own safety does not have to come into doubt. We make a decision. This is the decision. Listen to this. You want to know what the decision is? That's the decision. In every dysfunctional family, in every alcoholic family, in every cult, that is the decision. And based on that decision, whether you make it or abdicate it, whatever you do, that is going to decide the fate of the human race. That decision, right there. And I've just put it into fucking words. You're welcome. Let's sit for a second. Have some water. And that decision will change your life. And I can't tell you, I make that decision several times a day. And it makes me feel sick with myself. I want to be happy, but I have to go through the darkness. The darkness of man. It's oblivion. It's the place where only the raven can help you. The air and the eagle, the rain and the wind. anthropology textbooks, they have these ridiculous pictures of cavemen hunting mastodons with their spears. I don't think any such thing ever went on. And yet, they'll never show you about real hunting. Read something called The Black Stag. I think it's called. Is it The Black Stag? It's about hunting. It's written by an American frontiersman. Cult dynamics are shocking. They defy everything about human beings. And we watch the extent, in its darkest sense, that any number of human beings will go, more or less, which is confusing to survive when they grow up in a violent world. It's hard. And yet, if we want to live a long time, we don't just get away from things. We have to look more deeply into them. Not because I'm going to rearrange the human control how people work. What makes it difficult is you can't control it. Look without being able to control. You can get angry, but you can't control what people are going to do. In the case of companies, I will just go and go and go until I think I'm done. I'll be done when I'm done because, I need to learn. They all need to learn better. And this is owl medicine. Owl medicine is my friend. The owl is my friend. It helps take me. I'm mincing all these animals. The raven takes me into the darkness. I can't not be angry at certain people. But I love not having to be angry at my mom. fact that people can hurt shows that we humans have power. Power to do good, power to do harm. Let's get some water and we're off. What is that? I got a good story from my mom when we get home. Yeah, let's see. All the beliefs. Right? I see. And what are you supposed to do for me? You know how companies say, "Are you happy with the service?" You haven't helped me at all. Does that bother you? Do you think that there's just no help for me? Don't feel any way. No, that's my fault. I think it's my fault. I feel that way. After like 50 years of age, it's just my fault. If you're a scapegoat and you don't feel good about how someone's treating you, which is usually in some extremely passive, where they make physical contact, the worst violence that's happened to me, or some of it's physical, most of it's non-physical, like without physical touch, right? And you know, people in cults will tell you, "Oh, it's your fault. It's your own fault." I said, "Sir, it's your own fault. It's your own fault. It's your own fault." I think a lot of people live in a denial predicated upon a part of them basically taking responsibility for all the trauma they've ever suffered from. Something you can't really do. It's like trying to control something you can't control. And then when someone breaks the taboos of the cult around facing reality, people will start controlling the scapegoat and needing to control the scapegoat. I told this one woman in this cult, after someone under her had sexually assaulted me, I said, look, I don't want to get political, but I'm going to go over your head to the person who runs the company, essentially. If you don't deal with this, if you can't deal with this. At which point she could have told me, she had qualms about dealing with anything. And she said, oh, I think you know a lot about politics. And immediately at that moment, I knew, after time looking back on it, I decided to accuse me of being territorial, that it was all my fault. It was easier to blame me than any other option available to her. Either take responsibility, be honest about her own feelings, how this, ruined her sense of what she felt like doing that week, because one of her students had become violent. Because they probably sensed that they could get away with it. And they were correct. She proved them. They learned that they can get away with it. And they didn't even get what they wanted, because you rarely do, right? And they're on to the next thing, or the next person, or they're back to you at some point. And so she never gets the help that she needs, right? They never get what they want, right? They can do certain things, again, precisely because they know they can't, right? That doesn't reflect very nicely upon you to begin with. You know what I mean? Other men to restore this nothing will not happen. Understand? There's never enough respect, right? A weak leader will not be respected. And as much as that dog nipped me, the owner is a weak leader. A weak leader will not be. Then people will get away with things, or need to. And the victim will be blamed for become the scapegoat. Once you're blamed for what someone does to you, you're a scapegoat. The scapegoat is blamed for what someone else does to them. Because of some of the things I've said, people essentially taking more responsibility because of the trauma they endure in their own families. I almost slipped there for a second, right? Extremely perverse. And humans are bent into this pretzel during childhood through negative reinforcement in all different ways, TV, music, everything. When I talked to this RCMP officer after being assailed by a bus driver, the bus driver knew they would get away with it. The RCMP officer stopped. Her brain would just cease whenever any part of the conversation had to do with having to think about anything that would make it anything other than my own fault. No matter how scared I said I was, nothing was convincing to her that anything wrong had been done. Right? It had already been erased before she called me, and didn't even talk to the bus driver herself to find out what, if anything, was going on from her end. Right? Which, conveniently enough, would not have been justifiable if asked. Right? And if the driver had acquainted herself, or the company had, with anything of the relevant circumstances to begin with. And so this person was extremely ignorant on practice by the time they called me. They had nothing but silly, insulting, and rhetorical questions to ask me, all insinuating that it was no big deal. To basically just overpower me and hand me off. And you could see she was very, very disappointed about where she got with me, which was nowhere. She was very disappointed. You understand? She didn't quite get what she wanted. And she did kind of get what she wanted, because she made me sick, really. And, well, she didn't get what she wanted. She wasn't happy. She didn't get my complete obedience, right? She bought her own bullshit so well, and her own magical thinking, which people in violent related groups do, that she couldn't understand, and it even upset her. You could clearly hear it in her voice, that someone who wasn't there and never takes the bus doesn't want to accept what I'm telling them. Right? And police, you'll notice, are very magical thinkers. because what they have to do requires paramilitary and magical thinking, right? That they're doing something good by how they treat human beings. These are already generationally patterned alcoholics that serve in the military. They've already had their inhibitions lowered through tons of negative reinforcement. It's just like shit pounded in a certain shape and put into a certain costume at that point. And by that I mean that, there's a lot, you end up basically a lot of things in the world that the purest substance of man would never get up to, in so much as it virtually has to be totally sublimated in order for the person to advance. The virtual reality has now become a costume for a sense of self, at least somewhat relieved through very absorbed inhibitions and costume wearing and slogans and acculturation of neurotic effects at all, which can be accomplished very early in life, actually. The silencing of the human voice, the silencing of the voice of judgment. I've talked to a female sociopath in the area, and you can see that a lot of women were really strongly affected in that way. The voice of their own sense of personal judgment, so the spirit of the Amanita, is gone. It's been sublimated. And but costumes and things help reinforce masks, M-A-S-Q-U-E, in ways that humans can attempt to emulate the star-like quality of the alias and the theatrical and military narratives that cross the media and government and the daily reality of the news and newspapers and magazines and so forth, which are all written and coded in every way with Gnostic Kabbalism and morbid connotations about relationships, as though fundamentally based by nature, birth, mutual annihilation. So the idea, like in Oliver Twist, that the mother dies when Oliver is born. And he is set at utter odds with the world. And that's the only way, really, he survives, Dickens says, is that he is such odds with the world and in such incompetent care that if he'd had a loving family, he wouldn't have made it. It's that the situation was so exceptionally bad that just the pure essence of the divine could keep him alive. And in this way, it becomes a beatific confrontation, a beatific agony. And this is Gnostic Kabbalism, and it's Dickens. I met someone who claimed to be the great-granddaughter of Dickens, and you see how this comes across. I'm not sure if they were or not, or if they just have a lot of bastard children, but it's Gnostic Kabbalism. That's what I call Gnostic Kabbalism. And the Kabbah treats itself as though it is the mind of man, because various articulations through all language and numeric systems are essentially Kabbalistic, and as much as they attend to prey upon what the mind is good for and what you should do with yours. And that's what TV is about. It has an intelligence behind it that says what gender and the mind is good for, or to do about it or do with it, or suffer to have someone use it while you're not, which is basically while you're watching TV or listening to songs or in class or just in the different up and down hypnotic states of the average schizoid. And what am I doing with my life? Reasonably stoned. That's a lot to think about. Yeah, so it's based on the definition of someone who really can only, as Immanuel Kant said, Immanuel Kant aspire to be human, because he's not even really human, and yet all your thoughts are based on being a human. Think about that. And but your goal is to become human, so it's like you're not even born yet, because you were still born. Even though you were dead, you were still born. You were delivered as though a carcass. You are stillborn. What is a stillborn child? It's a dead child. It's also a child who is stillborn, despite having died, being attributed with this, because your mind comes under the control of the world. If it's not yours, it's better off just interpolating a certain kind of annihilation by birth, a sort of nihilistic imagination of the human mind. And it is born from the dust. It lives for a moment and goes to the dust. Oh man. And rage against the dying of the light. Man, Dylan Thomas. Right? So hunger, violence, the idea of being consumed. People who don't have a hunger, genuine hunger, to see balance in the world and health. I notice no job, especially jobs to do with touching human beings and arresting human beings, is really being all that healthy and sound in mind, heart, and body. Right? And no one expects you to be, because essentially you have the excuse of, oh, look at my victims. My victims are sick, so I've got to be sick too. Well, because you involve yourself with people who may be sick. And what would you say to a police officer like, oh, I've got a drink and all these awful things have happened to me dealing with criminals. Well, why don't you just not be a police officer then? Why don't do something else? Maybe you shouldn't be doing that if it hurts you so much and you can't do your job properly, right? And people do quit, People do quit the police. They do leave. Oh, the river's gone down quite a bit. Let's keep going. I want to make some distance here. It has warmed up a bit. You see. I think that's why people go public with certain things, because you can't get through to the CEO of various companies. They insulate themselves. That order of any company is always insulated from you. I notice a lot of online things where it's like, big things, and you can't find a number to call to talk to anyone high up. You have pictures on the website, Barbara, blah, blah, blah. No contact information.